first I'd like to say thanks for coming out and joining us for this nice lunchtime event despite the brisk air outside. My name is Dean Bonner, and I'll be presenting the research today on our most recent survey in the Californians in Their Government series. And this event is part of the James Irvine Foundation briefing series, and we'd like to thank them for their gracious support. And this particular survey was also funded through the James Irvine Foundation, so we especially like to thank them for their support for this particular work. On your chair, you should have a 2-page handout with key findings from the survey. And I would like to say that the full survey is available for download or viewing on our website at www.ppic.org. And at the website, you'll also find a really cool and interesting tool that we have, which is you can go online and actually, for most of our surveys dating back at least 5 years, you can create your own crosstabs on questions from the survey. So if you're curious how men and women or people across regions feel about certain questions, you can go in there and do your own little analysis. So just a couple more things before we get started. You should also see an evaluation on your chair. If you could possibly, at the end of the event, or right now if you have high hopes for me, fill out this evaluation form. This really helps us not only with the presentations, but some of the other things that the Institute does. And lastly, I would like to ask everyone to mute, silence, turn off your cell phones, iPads, whatnot, and that way we will be all set. I'll be taking questions after the briefing, but if you do have anything like that's of a clarifying nature or whatnot, feel free to raise your hand or just interrupt, and I should be able to answer those. Alrighty. So, but prior to discussing the specifics of this month's survey, I want to talk a little bit about the statewide survey more generally. The mission of the statewide survey is to provide timely, relevant, nonpartisan data on political, social, and economic opinions that we hope will inform and improve state policymaking, raise awareness, and encourage discussion. Since 1998, we have completed over 130 surveys and interviewed over 290,000 Californians. This specific survey is the 59th survey in the Californians in Their Government series, which is, as I mentioned, funded from the James Irvine Foundation. And we examine attitudes towards elected officials, along with political trust at both the state and federal level. This survey also examines attitudes towards the federal health care reform and measures public awareness of the state's health insurance exchange. For this survey, we interviewed about 1,700 Californians from November 12th to 19th on landline and cell phones. And the margin of error for all adults is 3.6%, while for the just over 1,000 likely voters, it is 4.6%. So with that, let's begin. So Governor Brown's approval today is similar to last December, and approval has been around 50% throughout 2013. About 4 in 10 approved of his job performance throughout 2012 and most of 2011. The legislature lags slightly behind the governor with the approval of about 4 in 10 Californians, which is an improvement from earlier this year. And approval of the legislature today is higher than it was in 2012 and much higher than it was from the time period 2009 to 2011, where the state was having a lot of budget issues. So when it comes to the overall mood of the state, a plurality of Californians names jobs and the economy as the most important issue facing Californians today, and just under half say the state is headed in the wrong direction or expect bad economic times. The overall mood of the state is also reflected in the fact that 2 in 3 Californians say that the state is in an economic recession, with 22% calling it a serious one. However, The 22% today is down from 40% last October who called the recession serious. So residents are seeing, or at least believing, that the improvement in the state has been occurring. And across regions, those in the San Francisco Bay Area are the least likely to say that the state is in a recession. Moving from the mood of the state to the personal financial situation of its residents, we find that about 4 in 10 Californians say that their personal financial situation is either excellent or good, while 6 in 10 say is fair or poor. And when we look at the findings comparing their current finances to a year ago, we see that just over half say that their financial situation is just about the same as a year ago. About 1 in 4 say they are better off, and about 1 in 4 say they are worse off than a year ago. And today's findings show how far we've come since the Great Recession. In December 2009, half of Californians said that their finances were worse off than the year before, and just 2 years ago, in December 11, 35% held this view. So we've definitely seen some improvements there. Latinos are the most likely to say that they're better off than a year ago, while Asians are the least likely to say this. And those living in households with higher incomes are not surprisingly less likely to say that they're worse off. And when we look ahead of the year, Californians are optimistic about their personal financial situation, with 6 in 10 saying that they expect their financial situation to improve a lot or some, while 1 in 4 say their finances are likely to get a little or a lot worse. Even during the Great Recession and the subsequent recovery, Californians were optimistic, with about half saying they expected improved finances in December 2009 and 2011. Today we find that whites are the least likely to say that their finances are likely to improve, and blacks and Latinos are the most likely. And interestingly, findings are roughly similar across age groups, but they do vary across parties, surprisingly, with Democrats much more likely than independents and far more likely than Republicans to expect financial improvement. So Californians and their partisan views aren't just limited to policy or political issues. They even spread over to things like personal financial situation. A topic of conversation that has been popular as of late is the concept of income inequality. And today we find that a record high 66% of Californians say that the state is divided into the haves and the have-nots, while 30% say it is not divided that way. In December 11, results were similar, but far fewer thought the state was divided way back in 1999. And today, while most across racial ethnic groups say it is divided into the haves and have-nots, blacks and Latinos are more likely than Asians and whites to say this. And illustrating how commonplace this sentiment is, more than 6 in 10 across parties, age, education, and income groups say that the state is divided into the groups of the haves and the have-nots. And we also asked people to self-place themselves, if they had to, into one group, the haves or the have-nots. And we find that Californians are split, with 40% saying they belong to the haves and 45% saying they belong to the have-nots. However, findings are similar to December 2011, but much different than in 2002, when 60% said that they belong to the haves. This is quite the reversal compared to today. And today there are large differences across racial, ethnic, and income groups. We find that Latinos and blacks are far more likely than Asians and whites to consider themselves as part of the have-nots. And across income groups, the differences are even more stark. While 2 in 3 lower income Californians consider themselves part of the have-nots, only 14% of those making over $80,000 hold this view. Less educated Californians are also far more likely than college-educated Californians to place themselves in the have-nots. And with a record number of Californians saying that the state is divided into these two economic groups, it's not too surprising that half of Californians think that the government should do more to make sure that all Californians have an equal opportunity to get ahead. And as you can see, there's a, there's a large partisan divide on this issue, with majorities of Republicans saying that people already have an equal opportunity to get ahead, and majorities of Democrats saying that the government should do more. Independents are actually divided on this issue, and we find that 6 in 10 Latinos and blacks say that the government should do more, while about half of Asians and whites say that people already have an equal opportunity. Also of note is that lower income Californians are much more likely than more affluent Californians to say that government should do more. So this divide kind of breaks down to the typical partisan divide when it comes to the role of government that we ask in other surveys, where Democrats think that government should be more involved in these types of issues, where Republicans say that they should not. So a half of Californians think that government should do more to ensure equal opportunity. Most express distrust in state government. Only 1 in 4 Californians think that the state government can be trusted to do what is right just about always or most of the time, while 7 in 10 say the state government can be trusted only some of the time or none of the time. And illustrating the depth of this distrust in state government, at least 6 in 10 Californians have expressed distrust since August 2002. So that's a deep and long opinion when it comes to trust in state government. And today, while most partisans express distrust, Republicans are more likely than Democrats and independents to be distrustful. And distrust is held by at least 6 in 10 across regions and all demographic groups. So this idea of distrust in state government isn't just held by one group or another. It's one of the more consistent findings when it comes to everyone just having a poor opinion of government. So while there is general distrust in government, Californians also believe that the state government wastes a lot of the money that they pay in taxes. Just over half of Californians and 6 in 10 likely voters think that the state government wastes a lot of tax money. Once again, this is a long-held belief, with at least half of Californians saying a lot of taxpayer money is wasted since February 2003. 7 in 10 Republicans think that a lot is wasted, while fewer independents and Democrats hold this view. And we also find that majorities of blacks, whites, and Latinos say a lot is wasted. However, only 4 in 10 Asians hold this view. So while it's still pretty far out in the future, we did want to get a first take on the gubernatorial primary. And California will be using the top 2 primary for the first time for a gubernatorial election in June. And if the election were held today, Governor Brown, with the support of 46% of likely voters, and Tim Donnelly, with the support of 16% of likely voters, would advance to the November general election. Abel Maldonado has the support of 7% of likely voters, while 29% of likely voters are unsure of whom they would vote for. So while it is an early look, there still is 3 in 10 California likely voters who aren't sure who to vote for, but overall, Governor Brown does seem to be in at least a somewhat decent position. 3 in 4 Democrats would support Brown, while Republicans are divided, with 36% supporting Tim Donnelly and 36% unsure of who they would vote for. 4 in 10 independents say that they would support Governor Brown, 17% would support Tim Donnelly, and 31% are unsure. Governor Brown also has the support of half of Latinos and 4 in 10 whites. And across regions, pluralities support Brown, except in the Inland Empire, where they're as likely to support Brown as be unsure. Half of women and 4 in 10 men support Brown, but 3 in 10 in both groups are undecided. So we're still far way off, but the challengers to Governor Brown do have some work to do, especially when it comes to their favorability rankings. So we find that it's not surprising that we find that most Californians have some opinion of 3-term Governor Jerry Brown, with 46% viewing him favorably and 40% viewing him unfavorably. When it comes to the 2 Republicans that we asked about, Tim Donnelly and Abel Maldonado, solid majorities say they don't have enough to have an opinion. 7 in 10 Democrats have a favorable opinion of Brown, while 7 in 10 Republicans have an unfavorable opinion of him, and independents are divided. Most partisans don't have an opinion of either Tim Donnelly or Abel Maldonado, but Republicans and independents have a more unfavorable opinion of Maldonado than they actually have an opinion of Tim Donnelly. And so while more people do know and seem to recognize Abel Maldonado, that doesn't necessarily seem like it's a positive for him at this stage in the campaign. As we move forward with our surveys heading into the new year, we'll continue to come back to this topic, and as more candidates announce and join the race, we'll also include them most likely in some of these perceptions as well. So now we'll move on to the federal government side. And in the wake of the government shutdown, approval of both President Obama and the U.S. Congress are at record lows today, with half approving of President Obama and 1 in 5 approving of Congress. Both the President and Congress have seen double-digit declines in approval since July. And as you might expect, there is a wide partisan divide when it comes to the approval of President Obama. However, when it comes to Congress, at least 3 in 4 across parties disapprove of Congress. So there is bipartisan support in their dislike of the job performance of Congress. Compared to Americans, Californians are more positive than the nation regarding approval of both the President and Congress. So turning to the overall mood of the nation, Californians hold somewhat mixed views. Nearly 6 in 10 Californians say that the nation is headed in the wrong direction. However, when asked about economic conditions in the next year, just under half expect bad times, and 4 in 10 expect good times. Californians' opinions on the direction of the nation mark a near reversal since January, when nearly 6 in 10 said that things were going in the right direction. And according to an ABC News Washington Post poll, only 1 in 4 Americans say that the nation is headed in the right direction. And on both the direction and the nation, in both direction, on the direction of the nation and the future economic conditions, Democrats are far more likely than both independents and Republicans to hold these positive views. So when we look at political trust at the federal level, we find similar distrust to what we found at the state level. Only 1 in 4 Californians express trust in the federal government to do what is right just about always, or some of the time, while 3 in 4 say that the government can only be trusted some of the time or none of the time. And trust today is similar to the record low of 20% recorded just 2 years ago in December 2011. Similar to state trust, we find that strong majorities of partisans across parties, regions, and demographic groups just express distrust in the federal government. So when we look at the perceived waste of taxpayer funds at the federal level, we find that Californians, likely voters, and partisans are even more negative than they were about the state level. 6 in 10 Californians say the people in federal government waste a lot of taxpayer money, and another 3 in 10 say that they waste some of it. In addition to majorities across parties, we find majorities across regions and demographic groups, except among Asians, think that a lot of taxpayer money is wasted. And when we look at Californians' views on both the state waste and the federal waste, we find that about 9 in 10 Californians say that a lot is wasted at both the state and the federal level. So these are people that hold these negative opinions about both sides. So when it comes to government today, there isn't a lot of trust, and regardless of level, and most Californians believe that at least some of the taxpayer money is wasted. So in the wake of the government shutdown, we want to ask again about the approval of President Obama and the Republicans in Congress when it comes to the federal debt ceiling and the deficit. And we found that since January, that both approval of both of these, both President Obama and Republicans in Congress have fallen. And currently 4 in 10 Californians approve of the president, on this dimension, while just under 1 in 5 approve of Republicans in Congress. There's a partisan divide when it comes to President Obama's handling of these issues, with 2 in 3 Democrats approving and 9 in 10 Republicans disapproving. Just over half of independents disapprove of President Obama. However, when it comes to Republicans in Congress, solid majorities of partisans, including 6 in 10 of Republicans, disapprove of their handling of the federal deficit and debt ceiling. So there's some pretty widespread disapproval when it comes to Republicans in Congress. So California's cynicism of the federal government can also be seen when they are asked about the likelihood of another government shutdown. 3 in 4 Californians and likely voters think that the government will shut down again in January, and 3 in 4 across parties agree. More than 2 in 3 across regions and demographic groups think that another shutdown is very likely. Unfortunately, Californians aren't really different than that of those opinions that are held by Americans nationwide, where we find that 7 in 10 say that they expect another government shutdown, according to an October CNN ORC poll. So I do have to add that there has been some news of late, and this news has mostly come out after our survey, that there is at least some hope or optimism among the parties that are currently trying to avert the shutdown, that there could be some type of compromise that could come out of this. So those kind of stories started to come out after we were already out of the field. So potentially, if we ask again, now those findings might be a little different. So with the rollout of the healthcare.gov website, we wanted to gauge Californians' opinions when it comes to the 2010 federal health care reform law. And we found that Californians were evenly divided in their opinions, with an equal proportion viewing it favorably as unfavorably. This is the first time we've asked this specific question, but we have asked about questions in previous surveys about supporting the changes that were enacted by the law. And consistently, when we asked that question in previous surveys, we found that about half of Californians were in support of those changes. So there has been some sliding when it comes to the favorable opinions of the health reform law overall. Americans nationwide are even less likely to have favorable reviews, with half saying that they view the health care reform law unfavorably. In California today, we find, of course, a wide partisan divide, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but 6 in 10 Democrats having a favorable opinion of the health reform law, and 8 in 10 Republicans having an unfavorable opinion. We find that among independents, half view the law favorably. Across racial ethnic groups, half of whites have an unfavorable opinion, while pluralities of Asians, blacks, and Latinos have favorable opinions. And opinions are divided among those who currently have health insurance, while those without health insurance are slightly more likely to view it favorably than unfavorably. So as part of the health reform law, states could set up health care exchanges, of course, which California has done. And when asked if there is a health insurance exchange available in California, a strong majority of Californians, including more than 6 in 10 across parties, regions, and demographic groups, correctly say that there is a health insurance exchange in the state. Among those who don't have insurance, about 6 in 10 are aware of the exchange, while about 7 in 10 of those who currently have insurance are aware of the exchanges. So it seems like there's potentially a little work that could be done among those who are currently without insurance. We also asked the just under 300 uninsured Californians that we interviewed whether or not they plan to obtain insurance in 2014 or remain uninsured and pay a fine. And we found that about 2 in 3 uninsured Californians plan on getting insurance, while 1 in 4 say that they plan on remaining uninsured. Especially of note is that residents 18 to 44 are far more likely than older residents to say that they would obtain insurance. And of course, this has been said to be very important because it's important that we enroll younger, healthier residents if the law is going to turn out successful. So it is encouraging that there is more younger Californians and older Californians. Unfortunately, because of the small sample size, we weren't able to do a whole lot of other breakouts or to do an age breakout that might be a little bit younger. But currently, those 18 to 44 are far more likely than those older to say that they will obtain insurance. And that's at least somewhat good news. Nationwide, a Gallup poll recently found that about 6 in 10 uninsured Americans plan on getting insurance. So at least in their intentions, 6 in 10 nationwide and 2 in 3 in California said they do plan on getting insurance. So moving from healthcare reform to poverty, we find that 6 in 10 Californians agree with the statement that it is the responsibility of government to take care of people who can't take care of themselves, while 1 in 3 disagree. Dating back to 1998, at least 6 in 10 Californians have agreed that the government has this responsibility. And today, once again, as you might expect, most Democrats agree with the sentiment, as do half of independents, while Republicans are more likely to disagree than agree with the idea that government should help those that can't help themselves. We find that majorities across racial ethnic groups agree, although blacks are far more likely than others to do so. We also find that solid majorities across regions, age, education, and income groups agree that government has this responsibility to take care of people who can't take care of themselves. So when it comes to the lives of poor people, half of Californians think that poor people have hard lives because government benefits don't go far enough to help them live decently, while about 1 in 3 align with the sentiment that poor people have easy lives because they can get government benefits without doing anything in return. More than half of Californians have agreed that poor people have hard lives each of the 6 times we have asked this question. Once again, we find that 2 in 3 Democrats think that poor people have hard lives, while 6 in 10 Republicans say that poor people have easy lives. Independents are divided on this issue, and not surprisingly, among those who earn household incomes of less than $40,000, about 6 in 10 say poor people have hard lives, while those making more than $40,000 are more divided. At least half of blacks, Latinos, and Asians say poor people have hard lives, while whites are evenly divided on this issue. Residents in the San Francisco Bay Area are the most likely to say poor people have hard lives, and those in Orange, San Diego are the least likely to hold this view. And this is a question where it's a question that kind of throws out the 2 extremes of this issue, but we're trying to do in this question is force people to choose one of them, with the realization that it may not exactly be true in every case, but just to get the overall sentiment of government involvement and views on how poor people live. So as we go into a new year, we wanted to gauge kind of impressions of political parties before the 2014 election cycle ramped up. And today we find that about half of Californians view the Democratic Party favorably. Looking at the Republican Party and the Tea Party, we find that nearly 6 in 10 view the Republican Party unfavorably, while about half have this unfavorable view of the Tea Party. At least half of likely voters actually view all 3 parties unfavorably. So when we look at the group that's most likely to turn out, there isn't a whole lot of love for any of these groups. And as you might expect, there's a wide partisan divide here, with strong majorities of Democrats having favorable opinions of their own party and unfavorable views of the Republican Party. 2 in 3 Republicans view the Republican Party favorably, while half view the Tea Party favorably. And when it comes to the all-important group of independents, who often are cited as difference makers in elections, independents have negative views of all 3 groups. That's why they're independent, right? Yes. So with the impressions of political parties less than rosy, it shouldn't be surprising that about half of Californians and 56% of likely voters say that the 2 major parties do such a poor job that a third party is needed. In surveys dating back to October 2006, about half of Californians have held this view and said that a third party was needed. And today, Democrats, Republicans, and especially independents are more likely to say that a third party is needed than to say that the two major parties do an adequate job. Among those who view the Tea Party favorably, just over half say that a third party is needed. Whites, blacks, and Asians are more likely to say that a third party is needed than to say the two major parties do a good job, while Latinos are more divided on this issue. So this is a long-held view, although we haven't really seen much movement when it comes to the third party, so it'll be interesting to continue monitoring this, especially the opinions of those who have favorable opinions of the Tea Party. So in addition to examining political party favorability, we wanted to gauge party perceptions when it comes to major party preferences of handling 4 key national issues. And what we find is somewhat surprising. On the issue of the economy and the federal budget, Californians are divided between whether the Democratic Party or the Republican Party could do a better job. However, when it comes to health care and immigration, Californians prefer the Democratic Party over the Republican Party by double digits. This is the first time we've asked about the federal budget, but we have asked these questions for the other 3 questions in the past. And what we find is that since March 2008, party preferences on immigrations have remained similar, but the preference for the Democratic Party on the economy has declined 9 points, and preference for the Democratic Party on health care has declined 12 points. So what we're seeing is we're seeing somewhat of a shift when it comes to at least the economy and health care on who could handle this better. Although Californians and likely voters do still prefer the Democratic Party when it comes to health care, despite this 12-point decline. Today, at least 6 in 10 Democrats and Republicans prefer their own party on each of these issues. And looking at the preferences of independents, we find that they're much more likely to prefer the Republican Party on the economy and the federal budget, while they're more likely to prefer Democratic Party when it comes to health care and immigration. So we didn't want the federal level to feel left out, so we wanted to at least look at some electoral issues when it comes to the federal stage. And looking ahead of a year, we asked about likely voters' preferences when it comes to the outcomes of the 2014 congressional elections. And we found that about half of Californians prefer, about half of likely voters prefer a Congress controlled by Democrats over one controlled by Republicans. And this is by a 10-point margin. And the findings today were nearly identical to October 2012 before the last presidential elections. However, before the last midterm election in October 2010, Californians were much more divided on this issue. Yes?
Would you give respondents a split control option? Or just all Dem or all Republican?
Yes, there was a volunteer category where people could say both as well. Yeah. So nearly all Democrats and nearly all Republicans would prefer their own party control Congress, not surprisingly. Independents would prefer a Congress controlled by Democrats. When it comes to likely voters who are Latino, which is increasingly becoming a important group in elections, we find that Latino likely voters also prefer a Congress controlled by Democrats, while white likely voters are divided on this issue. Across regions, a majority of voters in the San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles, 2 of the bluest areas of the state, prefer a Congress controlled by Democrats, while those in the Inland Empire prefer a Congress controlled by Republicans. Likely voters in the Central Valley and in Orange, San Diego were more divided on this issue. Speaking of divided, we wanted to ask a few questions, or at least one question about divided versus unified government. And despite gridlock that has often paralyzed Washington, California's likely voters offer mixed views on whether divided or united government is a better situation. 1 in 4 likely voters say it's better that the president's political party have a controlling majority in Congress, and 3 in 10 say it's better if one party controls Congress and one party controls the White House. A plurality of likely voters said that they don't think it matters too much one way or the other, which in itself may be reflective of their thoughts on how much of a difference it matters who gets elected. Preferences among likely voters were similar the only other time we asked this question in September 2000, right as the 2000 election was about to occur. Across parties, Democrats are the most prone to prefer a Congress controlled by the president's political party, which is perhaps reflective of the current political climate. And Republicans and independent likely voters are more likely to say they prefer one party control each branch of government than to say they don't think it matters too much. Nearly half of Latinos say they don't think it matters all that much, while white likely voters are divided between one party control and thinking it doesn't matter much either way. So moving forward, with the 2016 election on the horizon, this is hopefully a question we'll come back to and after the midterms to see if we'll see any shifts here. So in conclusion, Californians are divided on the state's economic outlook, although most do say the state is in a recession still. 4 in 10 rate their personal financial situation as excellent and good, and about half say that this is about the same as the year before. There's little trust in either state or federal government, and most think that the state government is wasteful. In a question I didn't highlight, we also find that strong majorities think that the state government and the federal government is pretty much run by a few big interests looking out for themselves rather than for the benefit of all the people. Most Californians are aware of the state health insurance exchange, and opinion on the health reform law is quite divided and quite equally split and divided along partisan lines. And Californians are divided on which party could better handle the economy and federal budget, while they prefer Democrats over Republicans when it comes to handling health care and immigration, 2 issues that are very in the forefront of the news currently. So with that, I would like to see if anyone has any questions.